Hello and welcome back to Lady Disdain Reads. It's been quite some time since I filmed my last video, and that's because I gave birth and I have been taking care of a little human for the past 2.5 months. And actually my first video back was going to be on a completely different topic from the one I've chosen today, and hopefully that's the next video I make. It was going to be on a book by legal scholar Erika Bakayoko called The Rights of Women, and when I finally get around to making that video, it's going to be about how Bakayoko talks about Mary Wollstonecraft in terms of Wollstonecraft being an Aristotelian virtue ethicist, and I'm hopefully going to use her ideas about Wollstonecraft and parenthood and gender to talk about similar topics within Jane Austen. However, why am I making this video today? And by the way, this is going to be my first really unscripted, more spontaneous video. Well, it's because Netflix released the trailer for the new adaptation of Persuasion, and if you're on Twitter at all, you will know that people have had very different, very polarized reactions to the trailer. Some people seem to love it, and some people seem to think that it might be the worst Jane Austen adaptation yet. And I just thought I would chime in with my opinions. Of course, I haven't seen the film, so I might end up completely changing my mind. This is just my initial reaction based on what the trailer shows us. So, things I liked about the trailer. Obviously, beautiful cinematography. It looks like they filmed Persuasion in some gorgeous locations, so that's always a plus. And costumes look good too. I'm not a fashion historian, but I am a fashion history enthusiast, and I know some things about fashion history, and it seems to me like the costumes are not outrageously historically inaccurate. However, I'm sure when the film actually comes out, a lot of people on YouTube who are fashion experts, fashion history experts, will release videos commenting on Persuasion's costumes, and I'm looking forward to watching those videos. I might link below a couple of content creators that are really good on fashion history. Now, these are things I liked. Everything else, I'm afraid to say, I was quite skeptical about. Again, I am happy to be proven wrong when the film comes out, but it doesn't look so good so far for me. So I have some minor qualms. The first one being Dakota Johnson's accent. Some people think that she seems to have done a good job of, recreating kind of natural British accent. However, I think it sounds a bit exaggerated, and I say this as someone who whose first language is actually Italian, not English, and I know that I struggled with speaking in an almost overly exaggerated British way when I first learned English, and sometimes I probably still do. But I think that's a very common thing to happen when trying to replicate an accent that's not your own, and I think it's a tad exaggerated. It's not the worst British accent by an American I've ever heard, but I think it could be a little bit better. Now, another thing that obviously that irked me, and I think it irked a lot of people, is the modern language. In the trailer, there's this one bit where Anne complains that Wentworth and herself are worse than exes. They are friends, or something like that. And that irked a lot of people. It irked me too. And the reason being that I think if you're going to use very modern jargon as a stylistic choice in a historical film, that can work, but I think you would have to have a reason to back up your decision to do that. And the trailer didn't show to me any reason why they would want to show Anne speaking in a more kind of modern way or with modern jargon, other than they are trying to appeal to a younger audience, which some people would argue that in itself is a good thing because it introduces Austen to new fans. However, I actually find it quite condescending. I think we can give young people, and myself included, I'm only 25, so I think I count as a young person still. I think we can give young people a bit more credit than that. I'm sure that a younger audience would be able to enjoy a historical film that does not use contemporary jargon, and in fact they might be interested in really fully immersing themselves in an era that's not their own, including having the unfamiliar aspect of a less contemporary choice of vocabulary, of jargon. To me, it just seemed like they were trying to take Bridgerton and make it Austen, and I didn't really like that. And finally, another minor qualm is Anne's hair is constantly down in the trailer. There are some scenes in the trailer where her hair is up, but most of the time it's just free to fly in the wind. And again, that's not historically accurate at all from what I know, and I wasn't really sure why they did that. However, these are just minor qualms. My two main criticisms of the trailer are, first of all, the Fleabag-style sense of humour. If you haven't seen Fleabag, it's a British TV show that was very popular and still is, and it has a very crude and very blunt sense of humour. And lots of people really enjoyed it. I do too, in the right film or in the right TV show, and for the right story, but I don't think it really works with Persuasion, and I'll tell you why in a second. And the other thing that really irked me is that the trailer gave me the impression that this film is going to really, I guess, glorify this kind of contemporary, very American myth of self-realization. And again, I'll explain what I mean by that in a second. So my first criticism, the sense of humour and breaking the fourth wall. Anne seems to break the fourth wall a lot in the trailer, and she seems to have this kind of more assertive, or not abrasive, but definitely more blunt sense of humour. She seems almost a little bit flippant, and yes, I think the character in the novel does have a sense of humour. However, I think the trailer makes her seem more like an Emma Woodhouse or an Elizabeth Bennet, and that irks me because those characters are great, but why is it that we can't appreciate a character like Anne Elliot or like Fanny Price in Mansfield Park, who people often dislike, who is more subdued, who is more introspective, who has strong opinions, but who is not so blunt or extroverted? I think there's something very American about not appreciating a more subtle, more subdued character like that. And that really annoys me, because I think Anne Elliot is such a wonderful character, and I wish we could appreciate her for what she is rather than for what we want her to be. And I think this also has to do with how we wrongly value what I would call perhaps self-determination in our contemporary kind of Western societies. So we value people being more abrasive, especially again in an American context. And I know I'm judging the States a lot, and I'm sure there's a lot of variety, but I'm saying generally speaking, I think America has a culture of valuing abrasiveness more, of valuing independence over anything else. And I think that really shows in the trailer that they're trying to make Anne Elliot seem like a character who is trying to achieve self-determination rather than a more introspective character. And those are qualities that you see more in Emma and in Elizabeth, but you don't see so much in Anne Elliot. And my second criticism, which links to the first one, is that I think the trailer focuses too much on a wrong notion of constancy. And constancy is a virtue that is so important in Persuasion. I have made so many videos in which I talk about the virtue of constancy. My very first video was about virtue ethics and philosopher Alasdair MacIntyre, and he talks a lot about the virtue of constancy in Jane Austen. And the way constancy is portrayed in the novel, I think, is very different from how it's portrayed in the trailer. Now, the film might do a better job, but I'm talking about the trailer so far. So what I mean by this is that it seems to me that the trailer shows a notion of constancy that depends on stubbornness, and a notion of kind of authenticity of the self that depends on atomization of society. So it seems to me that Anne is portrayed as someone who feels like she hasn't been as constant as she should have been to Wentworth, and her way of now finally being constant to him is to completely disregard the opinions of the people around her. She has this line in the trailer where she says, "Don't let anyone tell you who to be or who to love," or something like that. And that kind of stubbornness, that sort of notion of the self versus society, or the self versus the world, again, I think is very contemporary. It's very American, it's very individualistic, and I think in Jane Austen it just isn't as simple as that. It is true that Anne regrets not marrying Wentworth, but she also, I think, knows that Wentworth's notion of constancy is quite juvenile. So he values, at the beginning of the novel, constancy as this kind of stubbornness. So he seems to, for example, value Louisa Musgrove for saying that, you know, she would never let anyone tell her what to think or what to do, and instead he obviously is still hurt by Anne's behavior in the past. So he thinks that Anne wasn't constant to him. But Anne makes him completely change his mind by the end of the novel, and he realizes that a kind of hot-headed character like Louisa Musgrove is not necessarily constant as much as she is stubborn. And it's a kind of blind constancy that Wentworth was first thinking of, and that notion is corrected by the end of the novel. And especially think about the characters who are the kind of most stubborn, most hot-headed in their affections. Louisa Musgrove and Captain Benwick, who end up getting married, they are portrayed as foolhardy and overly emotional and almost ridiculous in the novel. Well, actually very ridiculous in the case of Captain Benwick. So I don't think we're meant to accept that notion of constancy or as kind of independence and foolhardiness. And it's also worth noticing that while Anne now realizes that her affection for Captain Wentworth should not have been cut off, she also says at the end of the novel, and I might try to find the exact quotation if I can, that Lady Russell's advice, which first instigated her to break off her engagement with Captain Wentworth, was not necessarily wrong at the time. So she recognizes that as a mistake in the long term, but she also realized that at the time Lady Russell was trying to get her to be cautious and had the best intentions. So it's not so kind of such a stark contrast between the kind of bad characters who try to influence Anne to not be her authentic self, as people say these days, versus the good characters who are the really independent, really stubborn ones. It really isn't as simple or as black and white as that in the novel, and the trailer doesn't seem to really show that subtlety at all. We'll see if the film does. I don't think it will based on the trailer, but we'll see. So again, the trailer to me seems to be seems to show a film that kind of portrays this idea of us versus society, or the self versus society, of negating duty in favor of passion, and I have a problem with that because I think the novel is rather about integrating passion into duty and into one's social life and social duties. Now, that might be very hard for us to understand because obviously this novel was written 200 years ago, and I think people had a different idea of what it meant to be virtuous, and I think we can see in the trailer that the way Anne is supposed to become more virtuous is by being more independent and being more abrasive and more sassy, as people say. And yeah, I think that just betrays our contemporary sensibilities, and it betrays our contemporary sensibilities having become very Americanized, even in Britain. Now, having said all of this, I will say that I, like many other people, really like the 1995 adaptation of Persuasion, the BBC one. I think that's great. I think it conveys so much passion in the characters without having to be over the top, or without having to be strangely witty in a way that doesn't really fit with Persuasion, like this newest trailer seems to show. I'm very happy to be proven wrong, and let's see what the actual film is like, and I'm sure I'll film a video about the film when it comes out and once I've watched it, but these are just my first impressions. There you go. Pride and Prejudice's original title, that's quite funny. But yeah, so I hope you enjoyed this video. This was very unscripted, very spur of the moment, but yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing if I change my mind. And please leave your comments below if you have seen the trailer and you have opinions. I'm really curious to see what other Jane Austen fans think about this, and hopefully I will see you in my next video to talk about gender and parenthood in Jane Austen and to review that book by Erika Bakayoko that I was talking about. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.